The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of the Exploring Judaism website, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the second day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 27th of Adar, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Monday, March 16th, 2026. We will read Parashat Vayikra this coming Shabbat, and we are 16 days from Pesach. Let's begin. Let's start with Me'am Loez on the Parsha. We're going to continue talking about this word Vayikra. I know we spoke about it yesterday, but there's still a lot more to say about this first word of the book of Vayikra, or the book of Leviticus. Vayikra, of course, means he called, or something called. And in this case, it's God calling to Moshe. And we gave one reason, if you were listening yesterday, of why God felt the need to call out to Moses first. But today we're going to offer a different reason. One of the reasons that the sages speak about this idea of God calling out to Moses before speaking to him is specifically because God loved Moses, that the call itself of Moses' name was actually an expression of endearment, an expression of love. And by the way, it's a great practice to take this into our own lives. When we want to communicate with somebody we love, we shouldn't just start talking or just saying, hey, you. But instead we should say, hey, the person's name. Hey, Marcus. Hey, Tim. By doing that, we show our appreciation of the human being before asking something of them or expressing something to them or taking their time. And I think if it's not that the commentaries themselves say this, or this is my svera and my logical understanding, but oftentimes when we try to communicate with someone, we actually forget who we're really speaking to. We're so concerned with what we want to say that we don't take into account first who we're actually speaking to. So this wonderful ethical practice of first calling out the name of the person before you speak to them really makes you understand that I'm not just saying this to a blank thing, or I'm not just saying this in general, but I'm saying this to this particular person who is, of course, of infinite value. Also, of course, by calling out the person's name beforehand, you can make sure the person is actually listening to you and knows that you're trying to speak to them, that you particularly want to speak to them and not somebody else, which, of course, shows the care and the love and respect for you or the person you're calling out to in particular. Now, we know this word Vayikra, or God called, is used a lot. One of the examples that we see it come up often is actually in our service. During the Kedusha prayer, which is the third blessing of the Amidah, it's a moment where if you're praying in a minyan or a group of 10 Jews, you'll hear one of them. We usually say the words "V'kara ze el ze ve'amar." This one called to that one and said, and this is a narration of the 6th chapter of Isaiah, when the angels called out this one to that one, and then they said, "Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh, Hashem Sevaot Melech Kol Haaretz." Holy, holy, holy is God. His holiness fills the whole entire land, the whole entire earth. And this is used specifically the way the angels call to each other with that much love. And it's the same way, of course, God called to Moshe that day. And we actually know that there are other situations where God actually does call upon somebody else who he has a relationship, but not such a positive relationship. And that's, of course, Balaam. Balaam is a sorcerer, a non-Jewish sorcerer who is at one point hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse the Jewish people. But Balaam somehow had some access to Hashem, had some access to God, but misused the power in this really bad way, trying to somehow manipulate God. And so when God calls out to Balaam, he does call out to Balaam, but it's spelled differently in the Torah. In our Parsha, it's spelled with an aleph, Vayikra, and that's actually the way it's usually spelled, from the Hebrew root kuf resh aleph. But here, actually in Numbers, when God calls out to Balaam, we see that the aleph is taken off the word, and it's just Vav Yud Kuf Resh, without the aleph at the end. Now, it's pronounced the same way, but the difference in the spelling here shows that God didn't appreciate Balaam and have the same respect that for Balaam, of course, lahavdil, may it be separate from the respect that God had for Moshe, our teacher. Let's now turn to the Mishnah Torah. If you were listening in previous episodes, we spoke about the idea and the rabbinic practice that as Jews, we have to search for chametz by candlelight on the night of the 14th of Nisan. So that's the night before the Seder night, the first Seder night. We actually have to search for chametz with a candle and try to find whatever chametz we can find and put it in a certain area so that we can burn it the next morning. Well, what about a case the Rambam brings up in the 5th and 6th halacha of the 3rd chapter? What about a case where someone forgot to check and look for chametz on the night of the 14th of Nisan, the traditional time? Can they continue to look can they still fulfill this rabbinic practice? And the answer is yes, they certainly still can. It's not ideal, but certainly something that should be done if you find yourself in this case. In rabbinic jurisprudence, we call this b'diavad, as opposed to latchila. Latchila means from the outset. So from the outset, the ideal should be that we should look for chametz by candlelight on the 14th of Nisan. But b'diavad, after the fact, meaning after we've already didn't make that ideal, then it is still acceptable to fulfill this practice in the morning of the 14th of Nisan. And you can actually continue to search for chametz even all the way still past the time even from destroying. He can even search at the time of when is usually the time when you destroy chametz, right? So that's usually 11 after the 11 o'clock hour of the day or at the beginning of the 6th hour, right? So you can still look for it then. And even during the holiday itself, you could still look for chametz. Again, we're already transgressed at this point because now we have chametz on Passover possibly, but you still can fulfill this rabbinic practice of looking for chametz on Passover and still at least fulfill that practice itself. The problem really comes after Pesach. After Pesach is over, yes, we should still look for chametz, but the reason that we're actually looking for chametz after Passover is not to sort of put it aside so that we may use it right before Passover begins to destroy it or what have you, but it's specifically to completely get rid of it. Why? Well, after Pesach, it's now permitted to eat chametz. It's perfectly okay to eat chametz, but as you might have heard from a previous class or a previous episode, what about chametz she'avar yanim lepesach, or chametz that has passed over Pesach? We know that chametz that a Jew has owned on Pesach is now forever forbidden to the Jewish people. Is completely forbidden and must be destroyed. So, in this case, if you search after Pesach and find chametz that was in your house during Pesach and you did not sell your house, in that case, or you sell the chametz, in that case, you need to destroy the chametz to make sure it's not eaten by anybody. And because eating from it even after Pesach, when again it's permitted to eat chametz in general, it is still forbidden to eat chametz she'avar alav Pesach, or chametz that we actually own during Pesach, a Jew actually owned during Pesach. Now, we know that this is a rabbinic practice. And often for rabbinic practices, we don't have particular blessings for them, but we know we have a mitzvah of biur chametz, or of destroying the chametz. So when the Rambam in the 6th halacha tells us what blessings should we say if we check for chametz on the night of the 14th, or during the festival, or right before the burning of the chametz in the morning of the 14th of Nisan, any of those times except for after Pesach, right? Because we are not actually fulfilling the mitzvah after Pesach of destroying chametz, the Torah mitzvah. Rather, we're just getting rid of the chametz so nobody eats it and transgresses in that regard of eating something forbidden. It's more of just a safety. So we only say the bracha in the case of, right, the 19th of the 14th, the night of the 14th of Nisan, the morning of the 14th of Nisan, or when we're searching for chametz during the holiday itself. The bracha that we say is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu Al Biur Chametz, which just means, blessed are you, our Lord our God, who has commanded us in his mitzvot and commanded us on the burning or the destruction of chametz. And very important, many people ask, it's weird that we say this blessing of burning chametz or destroying chametz when we're not doing it yet. Usually we say blessings very close to doing the action, right? Right before we hear the shofar being blown, we'll say a blessing over the shofar. Right before we shake the lulav on Sukkot, we'll say the blessing. But in this case, we say the blessing before searching, even though the blessing seems to have to do with burning and destroying chametz, because the rabbis really see the search for chametz, although it's a rabbinic practice, as part of the larger Torah mitzvah to destroy chametz. And it's going to be linked to that part that we're going to do in the morning of the 14th of Nisan at the beginning of 11 o'clock or the beginning of the 6th hour, to actually burn the chametz. So we're going to start that mitzvah in the evening by saying that this bracha on burning or destroying chametz right before we begin searching on the 14th of Nisan, and then we actually finish that same mitzvah on the morning of the 14th of Nisan when we finally destroy and burn that chametz. Very, very important. And again, after the holiday, if we're looking just once more, we do not recite a blessing. Let's now finish with Menorat HaMaor. We're still on the second chapter of the part of Menorat HaMaor on the traditions and story of Pesach. We're going to continue look at a particular Agadata or Talmudic legend, story, or idea from the first chapter of Sota 13a, a tractate in the Talmud. We talked in yesterday's episode about the idea that Yaakov, once Yaakov passed away, there was the beginning of the suffering of the Jewish people started to begin, right? So specifically, Yaakov died, and then we know that 210 years later, right, the Jewish people were free from Egypt. And so the death of Jacob really marked a transition in period. One thing we see that's really interesting when Jacob died is we know that Yosef and Yosef's self, his son, went to bury Jacob himself. He actually left the castle in Egypt where he was, or the palace, and he took the time out of his day to bury Jacob, which of course is a huge mitzvah and very, very important, and I think very becoming to a person of his royal status and his powerful job, saying, I have to make time to do this loving deed for my father, this mitzvah for my father. But I think, of course, what was incredible about this moment is it wasn't just Joseph who went down, and actually it was his whole he brought a whole armed guard with him and a whole entourage with him. It was really incredible, this sort of livui or escort that they did for Jacob, his father. But that's not all. According to this Agadata, there's a weird expression that's used in the place where Joseph goes to bury the father. It's actually called Vayavo ad Goren ha'atad, and they came unto Goren ha'atad. Weird. So Goren usually is translated as a threshing floor, and then atad is just sort of a weird word. It could mean bound or something like that, or it's just a strange word. And chances are, in reality, this might have just been the name of a real place, but of course the rabbis are going to read into this. And they say what this means is that actually an incredible thing happened. Not only we know that Yosef wasn't the only one at the burial, but rather also some of Yaakov's brother was there, right? And I mean, Yaakov's not Yaakov's actual brother, but the children of his brother, which is the children of Esav, and also, not only that, but the children of Yishmael as well, who was the famous brother of Yitzchak. And he too came to give respects to Yaakov, as well, finally, as the sons of Keturah. Now, Keturah was the second wife of Abraham after Sarah passed away. So there was a lot of tension between these different families. Almost they were basically different families at this point. They weren't even part of the same tribe, but they know that they were related, of course, all to Yaakov, at least loosely. Keturah, it's actually going pretty far back at this point. It's pretty loosely related, but still they all came at this point to sort of have a moment of peace around Yaakov's burial, and that's the respect. And supposedly what happened was they saw that Yosef had put his crown on the coffin as it moved. And this was a sign of peace, that this was not a time to act kingly and to be dominant over each other, but rather all of that falls apart. All of that falls apart when a person passes away, a loved one passes away. And so in response to this, all of the other sons who had their own crowns and their own kingdoms and their own places put their crowns also on the coffin. And supposedly there were 36 crowns hung around Jacob's coffin. And there seems to be something beautiful about that. Jacob was never a king. He was never some kind of political, leader in this way. Unlike Joseph and unlike the other sons who had these crowns. But for them to put that aside and say, Yaakov is higher than all of us. He's wiser than all of us. He lived a good life. He's such a good role model as a tzaddik, as a righteous person, that we're all going to step aside and just take this moment to say, Yaakov's above all of this and will always be with him, is this beautiful moment. And I'd like to tie it myself, although, again, I did not read this in a particular source. But there's a popular tradition that in each generation there are 36 tzaddikim, or Lamed Vav, 36 tzaddikim, righteous people that uphold the generation. And I like to think of these 36 crowns that were put on Jacob's coffin as the crowns of the 36 righteous. These righteous people who have talents and strength, but put aside their ego, put aside their desire to be the best, in order to come together in the Jewish tradition, to do righteousness, to do goodness, and to work together. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.